Within the discourse of Western science, the hunter-gatherer occupies a highly specific conceptual space. They are treated as an archetype, positioned precisely at the transitional boundary between the conditions of raw biological nature and human civilization. To explain the behavior of this figure, modern ecological anthropology relies heavily on a specific theoretical framework known as human evolutionary ecology. This diagram illustrates the architectural blueprint of that framework, mapping the principles of two distinct scientific disciplines onto a single human subject. By isolating this central node, we see how the primitive hunter-gatherer acts as the exact point of intersection for these competing theories. Evolutionary ecology claims to be an ecological science. In practice, however, it operates as the precise inverse of formal microeconomics. By conflating the mechanics of rational choice with genetic pre-programming, this widely accepted model places its human subject into an explanatory framework that actively prevents genuine ecological understanding. The root of this problem lies in a bedrock axiom of post-Enlightenment science: the strict ontological separation of biological nature from cultural society. Early anthropologists struggled directly with this dualism. Bronislaw Rolanowski explicitly dismissed the assumption that men on a so-called low level of culture would be driven by pure economic motives. This rigid separation traps researchers. They are forced to choose an explanatory mechanism, either pure environmental determinism, where nature dictates behavior, or extreme cultural constructivism, where society imposes meaning. Anthropologist Tim Ingold argues that this dualistic approach fails upon contact with reality. When applied to the lived experience of non-Western societies, the distinction between nature and culture breaks down completely. A scientific model built on an initial division between nature and culture is forced to generate contradictory conclusions. You cannot bridge a gap if your core premise is that the gap is unbridgeable. Looking at the upper pathway of this diagram, we find the conceptual origins of the formalist approach to human behavior. The core premise of neoclassical economics is that all individual behavior is driven by a single motivation: the conscious pursuit of rational self-interest. This operates through a mechanism called utility maximization. The model assumes a hunter consciously evaluates variables, calculates alternatives, and chooses a strategy that yields the highest return of resources relative to the time and energy expended. Here, the economic actor is credited with the active, intelligent design of their own survival strategy. They make deliberate choices. A specific cultural bias is embedded directly into this assumption. Reason is defined as a unique faculty belonging exclusively to humanity, which is exercised against the backdrop of an intrinsically resistant nature. Under this economic framework, the human subject possesses absolute agency. They operate entirely independently of any biological programming. Pivoting to the biological origin point of the framework, we see how science models the foraging behavior of non-human animals. The animal stands in stark contrast to economic man. Animals do not calculate utility value, nor do they consciously design their own procurement strategies. Instead, the mechanism of Darwinian natural selection serves as the true author of their behavior. The logic dictates that individuals with efficient resource procurement strategies will gain a reproductive advantage. Because these survival rules are encoded in the materials of heredity, the most efficient strategies automatically become established in the next generation. Within the biological model, the evolutionary force of natural selection acts as the rational designer. The rationality exists within the process itself, not the animal. Locating rationality exclusively within the evolutionary process strips the organism of all agency. It reduces the animal to a blind executor of a genetic algorithm. When we recombine the formalist and biological pathways, we expose how they collide within the archetype of the human forager. The fundamental premise of evolutionary ecology states that a forager's choices make up an adaptive pattern resulting from evolutionary processes. A strategy cannot logically be defined as a series of calculated conscious choices while simultaneously functioning as the blind product of Darwinian selection. The two concepts mutually exclude one another. Mapping formal economics onto Darwinian biology creates a paradoxical entity. It asks the human forager to be both a rational architect and a genetic automaton at exactly the same time. This isolates the organism from the real world. It treats behavior as a pre-specified heritable property that was formulated long before the organism ever interacted with its surroundings. The environment is reduced to a passive stage. It does nothing but provide the external selective pressures that trigger the internal programming. Human evolutionary ecology fails its own test. By eliminating the active, reciprocal engagement between a person and their environment, the model proves definitively anti-ecological. The traditional neo-Darwinian framework relies on a rigid loop. An alienated environment dictates the terms of survival to a passive organism. Modern biology, however, has abandoned these mechanical responses. The model of the pre-programmed individual contradicts the physical reality of development. Biologists now observe a process called niche construction. As organisms engage with their environment, they actively construct their own developmental path. By altering their physical surroundings, the evolving organism alters the selective pressures acting upon it. The organism becomes a selective force upon itself. Organisms and environments are not separate, alienated entities. They are locked in a continuous, mutually constitutive evolution. Returning to the physical reality of the human hunter-gatherer, we see an active physical engagement directly with the landscape. Learning and foraging are not the execution of internal genetic codes. They are situated practices, a continuous process of dwelling within a specific context. To analyze this accurately requires a monist approach. This means completely discarding the artificial boundary between nature and culture. We must view the human household, the oikos, as a total socio-cosmic community, where the person and the environment form a single, irreducible system. To truly understand human ecology, science must discard the contradictory fictions of both economic man and the optimal forager. The only way forward is to study the whole person, engaged in an active, ongoing conversation with their world.